But next I want to introduce a new guest to the programme who I haven't spoken to for some time because he's so famous he doesn't talk to me anymore, but I managed to persuade him and he's smiling, thank the Lord. Alastair Campbell, writer, campaigner, former director of comms for Tony Blair, and of course the co-host of the extraordinary The Rest is Politics podcast. And Alastair, I'm going to blow a little bit of smoke up your posterior because not only have you managed to fill the O2, which is quite extraordinary with Rory and Catty and the mooch from Washington, but also you gave a speech at the German embassy the other day, which I sadly missed, in German, in fluent German.
Ja, das habe ich gemacht.
Wunderbar. We won't bore our listeners with a grammar off, in German. But anyway, I'm very impressed. And you've written an article, I think, about how important it is to teach foreign languages at a time when actually the teaching of those languages, especially at university, seems to be withering on the vine, which is just eine große Schande. It's a great shame, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. No, I think I very rarely criticise the new Labour government, as you know, Matt, but I do think we made a mistake in downgrading languages. Yeah. And I think particularly post-Brexit, we need to be building friendships and alliances all around the world. And I just think learning other people's languages is a sign of respect and it's a sign of kind of your belief in the rest of the world. So, yeah, I'm a great believer in polyglottism.
Okay, jolly good. Well, we'll leave that to one side. Let's talk about politics then. So, you, as you said, it's important to learn those languages, to show respect, to build bridges. Talking of bridges, right? So here we've got Andrew Bailey, the governor of the Bank of England, and Rachel Reeves, more or less using the same language this week, saying, admitting that Brexit was an act of economic self-harm and saying, wouldn't it be nice to sidle up further to the EU without joining the single market and the European Union, which made me think of the old having your cake and eat it conundrum. While at the same time, the Trump people are saying, oh, we'd love a trade deal with America, but absolutely not if you are sidling up to the EU. You got to pick your team. So how would you describe the position that we on this island find ourselves in at the moment?
Well, I'd say it's very difficult, and it's going to require an awful lot of statecraft on behalf of the new government to navigate waters that have become ever more choppy. I think that if you just think about the amount of rhetoric and the amount of energy that was blown under the last Conservative government on them saying that Brexit was going to land this great trade deal with the United States. It didn't happen. It was never going to happen. And I think what you're seeing now is the UK government being confronted with some very stark choices. Now, ultimately, Britain has to have good relations with the United States and good relations with the key members of the European Union. And I think that thus far, I think Keir Starmer, I would like him to go further. I wish he hadn't ruled out rejoining the customs union and the single market, but he did. But I think that he's been doing the right things in terms of building those relations. And I think we've got to be very, very careful that we don't allow Trump, this sort of 300-pound gorilla, just to come in and imagine that everybody has to redefine their foreign policy because he's back on the block. We don't have to do that.
But he hasn't started in the White House yet, and it already feels as if this government, for all its good intentions, is stretched on a very difficult rack between Washington and Brussels. That rack is just going to get even more tricky, isn't it, after January the 20th?
Well, it could do. I mean, I don't know the extent to which American relations with the UK are going to be that high up Donald Trump's agenda. I think what is going to be high up his agenda is tariffs. And this whole stuff about 60% on China, 20% on Europe. Now, what the Brexiteers are saying, oh, well, aren't we in a marvellous position? We can carve out some special deal. Well, maybe. But ultimately, Labour's main mission is economic growth. Rachel Reeves made her speech the other day. She had this big idea on pensions reform, trying to see that as a lever on growth. But you just have to look at the economic data yesterday to see that, the growth mission is not straightforward. And I just think we've got to be very, very careful that we don't allow ourselves to be pulled by a combination of the Brexiteers, the right-wing media, and the sheer power of what Donald Trump has achieved in America to imagine that should define our economic diplomatic policies. So no, I think there's no doubt it's going to be difficult, no doubt about that at all. But in the end, that's why you elect governments to navigate these waters as best they can.
But just on that, just briefly, I mean, there's a practical scenario that I can imagine where Donald Trump, once he's in the White House, says, okay, it's 20% tariffs across the board, or let's say between 10 and 20% tariffs across the board for everyone. But, you, Britain, can be exempt from that or go down to, let's say, 5% if you sign up to this trade deal with us, which will involve a degree of deregulation on agri products and so on that your people might find unacceptable. And it also means that you cannot have any alignment or further alignment with anything that the EU has to offer. That will then pose a choice, won't it? And it's a pretty difficult one. So what would you advise him to do in that case?
To establish and define and execute what is Britain's national interest. And when you look, yes, America is a hugely important partner. When you look at both trade import and export, the European Union remains our most important trading partner. We have fundamentally damaged that relationship through Brexit, through the bad deal that was done by Boris Johnson, and through the failure of politics generally to address what remains a huge drag on our economy. That much was clear from the OBR report yet again this year. It gets next to no coverage. I think it was good of Andrew Bailey finally to come out and say what we all know. Brexit has really damaged trade. But I was disappointed by the fact that Rachel Reeves everybody's acknowledging the problem, but not actually addressing it. So I think we've just got to, not be bullied, not be intimidated, not be pushed around by America. We have to maintain good relations with both.
Do you think it's politically feasible to do what Rachel Reeves has ruled out, which is at some stage in the next few years, and we have no idea what the reality under Trump will actually feel like when it happens, for some stage in the next 2 years for this government to say, you know what, this sort of piecemeal stuff with the EU doesn't work, we've got to go back in, single market customs union, bite the bullet, whatever the political result of the referendum was, it was a mistake, we've got to reverse it?
I see very little evidence that they're even contemplating that might be possible. And, I often quote the great Canadian ice hockey player, Wayne Gretzky.
Oh, that guy, yeah.
That one. And the reason he said the reason he was a better player than the others, he always skated to where the puck was going, not where it had been. And I feel that the debate on Brexit is stuck where the debate was when people were imagining that it might be a great success. People were imagining that we might get these great trade deals. I think public opinion has moved on this. And the fact is, when we talk about I was at an event in Bristol the other day and people were saying, look, we want the Labour government to succeed. We appreciate that they want to work with business and they want to see growth. What we don't see is a clear plan for growth. And a big part of that plan would be to say, yes, we would go back to the customs union. The problem with that, of course, is that they absolutely ruled it out. So it's very hard to see that happening in the first term of a Labour government.
Now, just to go back to American politics, I know you were in the US on the night of the election. I know that you're not a great fan of Donald Trump's, nor is Rory Stewart, your co-host of the podcast, The Rest is Politics. And I think he more or less said, and I paraphrase here, correct me if I'm wrong, that anyone who doesn't think Harris is going to win is dumb, and he'd just put a lot of money on her, sweeping the board on this one. And obviously, it didn't happen. What do you think? Many observers of the election, including the Democrats, got wrong in this election?
Good question. I mean, I was never. I think what Rory's admitted that he allowed his wishful thinking to drive his public expression of his view. I wanted Kamala Harris to win. I was very influenced by people I was talking to who were there, who were going to Trump rallies, who were telling me the sort of things that people were saying and the sort of people that were there. I was also struck by a lot of the Democrat strategists I spoke to during the whole campaign, who felt that the issue of the economy was not properly addressed, that they didn't fight hard enough on the economy, given that actually the economic data in America is pretty good. So the Economist a couple of weeks ago, American economy, the envy of the world. But I think what Kamala Harris found really difficult was to get the balance between change and continuity. She was part of the Biden administration. She obviously didn't necessarily want to put that centre stage, but nor as the existing serving vice president could she sort of dump on it.
Yeah.
And so the change wasn't clear enough. And then I do think the whole kind of this sort of vibe thing and all the celebrity endorsements towards the end,
Bad
it just sort
idea.
of felt it was drifting. I also think we shouldn't underestimate. I was reading a thing this morning about what Trump voters believed Kamala Harris's policies to be. And the lies and the disinformation and the sheer weight that people like Musk and the Republicans more generally were pumping into people's homes and hearts and minds. There's a survey, I'll send it to you, Matt. It's absolutely extraordinary. What they believe Harris's policies to be was so far removed from what they were.
I mean, actually, I have to say, just finally, I spoke to some Republicans who actually said, she didn't fight a bad campaign. It was, whether it was too short, whether Biden bowed out too late. There are lots and lots of questions that come up there. She wasn't the worst campaigner I've ever seen in American elections. But I think on a couple of key issues, she didn't grasp the nettle. She couldn't be both an incumbent and an insurgent at the same time, or she didn't find the words to make that credible. Just a final question to you, Alastair. I know you're not a great fan of Trump's, but is there anything good that can come out of his presidency?
Well, it's hard to see because of the fundamental threat that he poses to so much that we think is important to us: the liberal world order, American leadership in the world, the rule of law, the role of fact and reason in political debate. I see him as undermining all of those. I see some of these appointments as being reckless and dangerous. And let's not rule out, let's not underestimate the extent to which what happens in American politics does sort of have a habit of being followed around the world. And you'll have campaigners and leaders all around the world thinking, hey, the way you got to win, you got to insult your opponents the whole time, you got to lie the whole time, you've got to turn it into a sort of form of showbiz. And I think that's just dangerous for all of us. So those people who say that Trump first time around wasn't as bad as people said that it would be, I think we're already seeing that Trump second time around is a very, very different, he's taking a very, very different approach. So no, I cannot pretend to be anything other than very pessimistic about the idea of him being in the White House for 4 years.
Alastair Campbell, thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme.